there's a huge upside of that too, becoming a master at something. But as the great samurai Miyamoto Musashi said, the path, of mastery in one thing leads to the path of mastery in all things. So if you get really good at something, it's like learning a language. You can learn the second one a little bit better.
All right, this is the Story Series podcast where we tell the stories behind the people. John S. Couch, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm thrilled to talk to you. So as is customary, I like to just read a brief intro for anyone who may not be familiar with who you are. You are an artist, a design leader, and author of The Art of Creative Rebellion, which I just finished and I love. Formerly the vice president of product design at Hulu, where you oversaw the redesign of the Hulu experience as well as the user interface. You've also held key roles at eBay, CBS, Wired Magazine, to name a very select few. So all that is to say, I'm really excited to talk to you.
Same here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So just as a way to get to know you a little bit better, I like to start with origin stories. Mm-hmm. And so if you could, where did you grow up?
Well, if we go far enough back, I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, because my father was getting his doctorate at Tulane, and my mom was someone who he contacted to help translate a scientific paper because she's Japanese. And so the two of them connected and ultimately got married, and I was born there. But I grew up in Texas, actually, because my father was a professor at TCU. And, so I spent my formative years in Texas, up to about my teenage years, going to college, left, and then moved to England, actually, and then spent a lot of my 20s traveling across Europe, doing the kind of bohemian life thing, which I recommend everybody do, because in your 20s, you can either travel when you have no money or you can travel when you have a lot of money. I find easier than if you can travel with middle-class responsibilities.
Yeah.
So I bounced around Europe, went to Japan, ultimately ended up in San Francisco, where I started at Wired Magazine.
Right. Yeah. Now, going back, like when you were in high school, kind of approaching graduation, trying to figure out what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
If somebody asked you back then, what did you want to be, quote unquote, when you grow up, what would you have said?
I don't think most people really know what they want to be. And if they do, it's unusual. I think there are people who are born to be a musician or a chess prodigy, or they find their passion very early, but that's like a very small percentage. Someone like me is more of the mean of like the creative path, where I knew I wanted to do something creative, but I wasn't sure what that meant. So I initially started school as pre-med, and I thought, well, I would be a doctor because for no apparent reason, then my dad's a scientist, and it seemed like it's something I should do. And then I had an existential crisis in my second year and realized I don't want to be, in a laboratory. I don't want to be a doctor. I want to be an artist. And so I went into painting at that time and design. And, I don't think you should put a lot of pressure on young people, because it can take a while to really find out what your thing is and feel comfortable with that thing. The trick is, that people are pressured into thinking, well, I have to choose a path right off the bat. Like, I've got to be an accountant. I've got to be, an engineer, fill in the blank. But in reality, you don't. And I think the more life experience you get doing things across very different, disciplines is actually going to be useful for whatever you end up doing in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. And did you have those kinds of creative inclinations early on, like when you gravitated towards painting?
Yeah.
And why that?
Well, there is, all that being said that I just said, the reality was I was drawing constantly at the age of 3, just obsessively drawing. And if I look back, it was really pretty obvious that I was interested in visual stuff as well as writing, because I read and wrote quite a bit. And what I've often told people as they have matured in their career is the thing that you loved doing when you were 5 years old, it's the thing you still love to do. You just haven't done it. If you love to perform or dance or sing or draw or write poetry as a child, you probably still do. But you haven't allowed yourself to do that because of societal pressures, family pressures, economic pressures. We tend to then completely say, well, that's not important. What's important is that I provide for my family, which is important. But what's also important is you'll be a better provider, a better participant in life if you connect to the thing that you love doing as a child, most likely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sometimes it's just a matter of what you see. like you said, your father was a scientist,
Yeah.
and so for you, a doctor was like kind of the logical path.
Yes.
But did you not have those kinds of artistic mentors at that time that you could look to?
Yeah, it was interesting because not only did I inherit influences from both sides of my family, my dad as an American white scientist, my mother as a Japanese artist. So I combined those inclinations together so that when I'm doing any kind of problem solving, I use a lot of scientific method. And that probably served me well when I was designing, because design is different than art in that design is a utility, so to speak. It answers questions, is there as a problem solving exercise. Art is more of a questioning exercise. It's there to confront you, not provide the answers, and open yourself up to it. So there's a superficial kind of, combination of things that people say, well, they're both visual. But in reality, yes, they're visual, but conceptually they were quite different. So I found that it was interesting for me to like take the methodical thinking that my father had and bring that into the creative process. Because if it's really important in creative work that you have parameters that you work within, because if you don't, then it can actually be quite anxiety, ridden experience otherwise.
Yeah, parameters like the importance of creative restrictions.
Yes, so if you are designing something, it's better to reduce your typography down to like 2 or 3 fonts versus like putting everything in there. That being said, you can also break that rule completely and do that as well, but it has to be done with an understanding of what the parameters are. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were talking a little bit before this, and as a screenwriter, I've worked across several different kinds of animated shows. And one thing that's always exciting to me is finding out what the box of that show is.
Yes.
So it's like, okay, whether it's preschool or it's for older kids, you can't do anything, even though it's animation. There's demographics, there's kinds of network considerations.
Right.
But I think it's exciting to find out what that box of that show is, what's that world that you have to play in, and then try to push as close as you can.
Yes.
But those restrictions, I think, do help creativity.
Yeah, I think, let's say a painting, you have to work within the logic of that painting that you've set for yourself, by the way. And then you should at least start that way. So that being said, as you're doing like a figurative painting and you're working within the, constraints of what a figurative painting is, whether it's, representational, graphic, or what have you, that all being said, you should then consider breaking that rule and flinging a pot of paint at it to see if it'll break that particular thing that you did.
Yeah.
And then sometimes in that moment, you have this interesting dynamic between expectation and like what just happened. And then you'll find, at least I have found, that a lot of great writing and design and art and businesses are based upon this kind of like expectation that you're going to go this direction. And then suddenly there's this complete loop and change that's not gratuitous. Only afterwards you go, oh, that made perfect sense.
Right.
But in the moment, you're really surprised. It's like a twist at the end of a TV show. You're like, I did not see that coming, but it makes perfect sense
Right.
that it happened.
Right. But you kind of have to follow the rules for a while to know which ones are worth breaking. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, like, I did martial arts for a long time, and the last one I did was, the most gentle of them, which is Aikido. And O-sensei, Ueshiba Morihei, the founder of Aikido, said, you must practice over and over and over and over. This is nothing new to get to a point that you know the rules so much you can forget them. So you have to get to a point of mastery and then you let it go. And this also happened like, in the arts, for example, Willem de Kooning, was a great abstract painter, but his childhood studies were like, Renaissance looking drawings and paintings. And then he deconstructed it. It's obviously Picasso did the same thing, but you'll find that a lot of people learn the rules first, and then they systematically then subvert those rules. But those rules have to be subverted in an authentic way, because otherwise people can kind of sense, well, that's just being gratuitous.
Right, right. Sometimes I talk to different screenwriting classes or film classes, and there's always a question of like, well, why do we have to follow structure in storytelling, or why rules in filmmaking in general? And while I think the spirit of that question is valid, I think sometimes there's a desire to break all the rules right out of the gate,
right?
And it's like, well, try to follow them first and just see what works for you. And like you said, see which ones you can kind of peel back and push or challenge or
Right.
throw that paint against the canvas and see what that does to you, as opposed to just breaking everything, because you don't have that experience to know to navigate that, right?
Right. And that's generally what new creatives do, is they want to like immediately do something quote original. But the reality is, like let's say a film is a 3-act structure, second act being the biggest one and the most difficult one to get through. Generally, you kind of know what the beginning and ending of a film is going to be, but there's a certain social expectation of what that's going to be. There's a midpoint complication. There's the all is lost moment, going into the third act, et cetera. And you can subvert that, but you have to make sure that people don't feel gypped in that process. If you set the expectation in a film that you're going to go into a very different kind of film, like, David Lynch kind of film, or even like a Jean-Luc Godard type of film, then people are going to be more accepting of that change. That being said, what's really interesting is I notice in music that there's always been this, kind of chorus, pre-chorus, kind of structure to singing and music. And then you have someone like Billie Eilish who will build up a structure and at the very end completely change the last 2 minutes of the song to where it's almost like a different song, but it still made sense with the first part. And that is a way of seeing someone who is very smartly subverting the genre, but in an organic way. So again, I do think you kind of need to know the rules of the road before you go around messing with it too much.
Yeah, I'm reminded there's a part later in the book, and you quote Jim Jarmusch, the filmmaker, and it's about, just to paraphrase, it's not to chase being original, but it's about being authentic.
Yes. It's interesting, like again, using film as an example, I would argue that all creativity is really a remix. And the example is Tarantino.
Right.
Clearly, having his education, being in a video store, and then studying all the great film directors, he then almost matches frame for frame as an homage. You could look at it, or you could almost look at it as like, well, he's taking from it, but he's not. He's actually running it through his own filter, and that's very authentic to him. He's using the genre and tropes of filmmaking, but he's putting it through him. And I think this is really an important point, because when we connect to creativity, when we connect to like a great piece of art, and I'm using that word art broadly to say film and music and poetry and whatever, we're connecting to the human being who created that thing. And this is a very important point in my mind about AI and the time that we're in, because what's happening is that we're outsourcing our creativity to some extent. It's great if you use AI. I'm not an anti-AI person, as an augmentation of your abilities. But when you are, and I saw this with my daughter's was tutoring, and she was getting papers that were written that went from being terribly written to suddenly like really well written. And she put those papers, into ChatGPT and asked it, like, was this done in ChatGPT? And it said, yes, most likely it was done. So the problem, the tragedy with this is that if you are offloading your essay writing, the essay, form is important because it helps you think through something creatively. And it may not even be a well-written essay, but the fact that you as a human being went through it is what's important. So if you keep outsourcing this, then we'll end up with this kind of like echo chamber of content that might appeal to us, but it'll be soulless, because what you're interested in when you're reading a book, whatever favorite writer, is associating yourself with that person, and I'm not saying like, oh, it was a really hard book to write and there's a pain, but it's more of like they're getting a little metaphysical here, like they're the imbuing of their life energy into the creation is extremely important, I think. And if you don't have that, human beings can tell, and no matter how, realistic it gets, I think you can tell. And a lot of young people like my daughter's age and younger almost having this reaction against this, because as things get more and more replicable, I think you're going to have more and more of an interest in like the handmade, ironically, that the human-made ceramic vase or the oil painting or vinyl, which is already happening as well. The value of those things will get higher. I think.
You talk about stay analog as long as you can.
Yes, so in the book I talk about how I led design teams at Hulu, where I think it's really important that before you go straight into the computer, that you think it out on paper. And the reason why is that when we get on the computer, we immediately start to default down to the patterns we know. Oh, I know how to use a copy and paste, put this in there. But if you work it out on paper, very much you're as a writer, you're carting out the story. You're figuring out like what the main scenes are. Same thing happens, when you're designing, you go, okay, well, a human being wants to get X. In the case of streaming services, a human being wants to get to their content. They don't know what content they want. So this is the problem solving part of it. So how does one go through this process? So you go through literally like taking a person, walking them through a day in the life of like trying to get their content. And what happens next? It's a yes and kind of like, improv thing. Then what happens? Yes and, yes and, yes and. And then once you understand the user journey and you have radical empathy for what they're trying to do, then you can say, oh, now I can start to squint my eyes and see what this thing could look like. And then once you get all that done, and oftentimes we did it with Post-it notes and Sharpies and put them on the wall and just literally drew for the entire day. Because then once you do that, it's like writing a treatment for a screenplay. Once you understand what this thing is, then you can kind of go into high fidelity.
Yeah. Well, let's stay there then for a minute. So you're referencing your time at Hulu as the vice president of product design.
Yes.
And so what you were tasked with was redesigning the user interface.
Yes. So product design, just to kind of define it for your audience, is not the physical 3D product, but it's actually the application you get on your phone. So, for example, you can watch Hulu on your iPhone. You can watch it on Android. That's one location is mobile. Another one would be the web. You go online and you literally there's a website. The third one is the most difficult. It's called Living Room because then every television has its own what's called SDK, a software development kit. That means it has to be designed specifically for either a smart TV or like an Xbox or all the way down to a Roku stick. And so you have like 80, 90 different types of designs you have to do for that. So the Hulu product design, when I started in 2016, had to be rolled out within about 13 months because it was going to be shown at the May upfronts in 2017. So we had this interesting moment where we had to hire a bunch of creative people, designers, writers, UX researchers, and maintain the existing business, because we have a business that was running. And this is the trick. And then build a new business in parallel that would then be put on top of the new business, so to speak. And that required, amazing technologists. It required amazing product managers. And it required a coordination between, as they call the three-legged stool, which is product management, product design, and technology. So we did this. And so I had to work with a separate external agency, two of them. One was called Huge, and the other one was called IDEO. And so then we had two programs running at the same time. And then we launched it at the May upfronts. And what was really lucky at the time is that we had a show that did really well called The Handmaid's Tale.
It made a huge cultural impact, and it still is talked about.
But what was amazing is, no one goes to Hulu or Netflix because I heard the UX is amazing. The UX is almost like editing in a film. You want to almost be not seen if you can. People go because they want to see like amazing content. And so we had this amazing combination, luckily, of great content, a new design, and great marketing and branding that all had happened. So the story around Hulu went from being like, oh, is Hulu around still? To like, oh my gosh, have you seen Hulu? And that's what you want. It's never like all the responsibility can't just be on marketing and branding. And all the responsibility can't just be on the content. It can't just be on, the product design. It's got to be this beautiful synthesis of all the above.
Yeah.
And that's the trick.
Yeah. And so you were talking about there was obviously an existing business. Hulu was still a product that people could use, and you had to work in parallel to that.
Yeah.
So it's almost like redesigning a plane while it's flying.
Yes.
And so what was the problem at that time where you were then brought in? Were they finding that people couldn't find what they wanted to find on the platform? Why did they even go about doing this redesign?
I don't think there was a problem. I think that, the business was doing okay. But with the ascent of Netflix at the time and the, Amazon Prime Video, there was definitely a feeling like, well, Hulu's been around since like, 2000, I don't remember, 2009 or something like that. It was essentially built as a hedge against YouTube at the time. And the broadcast companies realized, oh, we got to do something. So Hulu was owned, I believe, at the time by Fox, Disney, NBC, Comcast, and Time Warner. And there was a feeling of like, well, these large companies are investing in this platform, Hulu. So how can we differentiate? So the thing that I was brought in to help with was also bringing live TV into it. There had not been live TV. There had been on demand, and there had been advertising based. So live TV is a very different kind of business than video on demand, because live TV cannot go down. If you're watching the Super Bowl and then you suddenly cut out, you're going to upset a lot of people. If you're watching a movie and on demand and it happens to glitch for a second, you can reboot it, and you have more patience for that. So it's so many different things going on at the same time. Maintain a business, build a new business, build a new experience, and you had to coordinate a lot of people to get this done. But I love that because it's innovative, right? You know, to me, what's fascinating and interesting is like, oh, it's a problem that hasn't been solved yet. No one's done this. So how do you do this? And I don't like innovation just to say I'm doing something different, but how does it serve a human being? How does it make your life better? You know? And one of the key things we had to talk about with Hulu was, at least from my perspective, was like, why Hulu? You know, like, why does it exist? And so my theory, and I went back, is like, well, storytelling, the thing you're doing here too, is incredibly intrinsic to human needs. Going back, you know, probably in our DNA, being around the campfire and hearing the elders or wise people tell you the stories of your ancestors and telling you where you can go, you know, find safe haven if there's a storm is happening, or where you could find hunting, et cetera. And then what are the mythologies to give you purpose and meaning that, you know, that each group would tell. And then, of course, this storytelling, you know, transformed over time. You know, in Western tradition, it transformed into like, you know, the Greek theater. That's where you ended up like getting the first kind of like acts, you know, Aristotle, et cetera. And then it moved from that into, let's say, just kind of quickly, Shakespeare, and then Shakespeare having an intermission in the middle of like, you know, the play. And then you end up like, of course, evolving storytelling into everything from theater to radio, film, TV, and then ultimately how we experience it now, you know, which is clearly through a mobile device or IMAX. You have a huge number of choices, and eventually more and more, I think it'll be like augmented reality, VR. So the point is, the glow of the fire is now the glow of the RGB screen. You know, so storytelling's form has changed, but the need as a human being to connect to a story is still there. Because if you really think about it, everything is story. Everything in your head is you telling a story about what you're seeing. You know, because a thing happens and you interpret it, and that is storytelling. So I think that's the reason why storytelling will never go away and why it's so important. And again, going back to the issue of like AI, if AI can help you with stories that are important for you as a human being, I think that's great. But it shouldn't be outsourced completely.
Right.
You know?
Now, going back for a second on your process, you talked about in the theme of being analog for as long as possible, Post-it notes and at Hulu. But one thing that you said was that you didn't want to study other competitor streaming services.
Right.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about why?
Well, because when I was at CBS, I remember one of the first things we did that was, you know, and I apologize for this, but we had a rotating carousel, which I'm not going to claim that I was the first, but I think I was one of the first to really push that, because you have a limited amount of space on the web, and this is in the mid 2000s. So how can you show more than just one thing? And you,
the rotating carousel is
like you know, static image of like a TV show, static image of a TV show,
all the new TV shows,
right? And if you click on it, you go into that, right? So what I noticed is like immediately NBC and, you know, ABC started, and Fox started doing the same thing. I'm like, oh, so we tend to do this, right? We tend to like follow patterns, which makes sense, right? And there's only so much you can do within a grid of a screen, and so the majority of people at the time in 2017 were essentially doing what's called a mosaic. You know, just cram as many boxes on the screen.
Yeah, the little thumbnails.
Yeah, it's possible. You know, and you still rows, right? Rows and trays of content, which you still see, right?
Oh yeah.
So the cognitive load is pretty high. My hope at the time, and you know, in 2017, was it, we called it machine learning at the time, not AI, was that it would get to know you so well that content that was relevant to you would be shown to you. So what does that mean? Like, when you're onboarding, you would say, well, look, I like these kind of TV shows. I like these genres, et cetera. So when you land for the first time into Hulu, as an example, it would be familiar territory. Oh, yeah, I know these shows. I like these shows. It wouldn't be like, figure it out. And then as you use it, then the machine would learn more and more. Well, clearly, you like this kind of nature show, or you like this kind of like reality show.
We call that kind of the algorithm,
Yes,
right?
the algorithm.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, in that case, let's make it cinematic, so we don't have like so many, mosaicked out trays, but show things which we think are going to be relevant to you. And the miscalculation there was that we thought that the machine learning would be more accurate than it was. Because what I wanted to do is like, you come in and you see like 3 things, not 30 things. Now, I do think that this is where AI is great. That now it's finally caught up to where AI can probably more and more find specificity for you that makes sense. I mean, it's already happening like on Instagram. It's amazing when I like a certain kind of, like say self-help kind of thing, then suddenly, boom, I'm getting self-help from everybody.
Yeah.
More
and especially the ads too on Instagram are fantastic. Whereas, the ads on Twitter/X are horrible.
Yeah. I've actually bought so many things on Instagram. I hate to admit it, but
No,
like
I've done that too.
They target me, but I don't do that on any other platform.
Right.
But there's no reason why that can't happen. So, for example, I was consulting with Amazon Prime Video. You talk about an opportunity. They have the world's largest, marketplace, and they have an amazing, content on their Amazon Prime Video and Studios and MGM. There's such a great way to correlate those two together, to where it doesn't feel like I'm being sold something. It's more like, oh, that's cool. I like that. What are you wearing? That shirt is cool. I mean, this is the old promise. Back in 2005, we're like, pause, click, but now you don't have to like pause and click. You can simply use your voice and talk to your TV and say, that is a cool look. Give me that. Put it in my, my list or what have you, and, my shopping cart. So I think more and more that's going to happen as well.
Around the same time that you were at Hulu, was that when you started writing the book?
Yes. So I wrote The Art of Creative Rebellion primarily out of a speech I gave at South by Southwest. So when we first launched Hulu, the new design, Reddit and subreddits just blew up, and one of the titles was, I hate your effing design, without saying effing in the full. And I thought, oh, that's a great working title. And I thought that would be a good speech at South by. And, I decided not just to do it myself, but actually I worked, I got a couple of design leaders from Instagram and Twitter as well. It was called Twitter at the time, to be on stage with me, and we would talk about this. And it was a really well-attended South by event. And I can't remember, it was 2017, 18, I can't remember like that. So afterwards, I was getting a lot of people asking me like for books that I would recommend. Did I have a book? My wife and daughter were with me at the time, and my wife said, why don't you just write the book that you wish you had coming up in this business, how to become a creative leader. And I thought, oh, great, I'll write, like a book that's Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke. That was my initial intention. And it turned out to be more like Kitchen Confidential, by Bourdain, because
I think that's a good mashup right there.
Kind of a nice combination, because you want to have the heart of why creativity is so important, because we're all born creative, and maintaining that. And then you also want to have practical advice of like, well, there's the ideal, and then there's what's actually going to happen when you enter into a place that's going to be very much pressurized and business and financially focused, as well as, focused on the human. So that was the original intent of the book. And I thought it would be a great guidebook for people to see. Like, I didn't want to say like, well, it's not a memoir, even though there's a lot of anecdotes of my stuff, but I brought my own mistakes into it as an example of how the principles and tenets in the book worked for me or didn't work, and how I found those tenets through having problems and messing up.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you were writing it, what did you learn about yourself writing the book? Because it's not a memoir, but it's like you said, there's anecdotes. So you're kind of going back and re-examining your life, starting from Wired. You're going through, founding your own company.
Yeah,
that process. When you're kind of like trying to capture these moments and kind of draw out these lessons, what are you learning about yourself?
Yeah, what's interesting is I realized for a long time I think I was closed off, like emotionally, and I was playing the role like an actor of this is how a creative director behaves, initially, early on, and it didn't work. So what I realized is I had to be, and this is before the whole Brene Brown being vulnerable thing happened, but I realized the only way that I would be effective is if I took my own ego out of it. Like instead of like, being a typical creative director where you're being served by people for the aggrandizement of oneself, so many creative directors I know and all, everything from brand marketing and product had other legions of people making their presentation decks so they can go and present it to the CEO as if they did it. And I thought, that's wrong. It really should be the people doing the work that should be presenting. And like, why do I care? Because I get the halo effect of a healthy environment. And I don't need to have my sense of self tied to my title so much. I need it to where I feel good about coming into work. I feel good about the product that we're making. We're shipping great stuff. And I'm happy that the culture is good and everybody feels needed and relevant within that. So going back, I realized that was the common theme, that initially I was closed off within the business context. And then once I opened up, once I decided to, like, it sounds a little hokey, but lead with love, and then the dynamic changed radically. There was a feeling of like, oh, this is a safe place. And being in a safe place as a creative is incredibly important, because the moment that fear comes into the room, creativity goes out the window, because you're no longer expansive. What you're doing is you're trying to make something that's going to make your boss happy, which means all possibilities have been reduced down to a small number of what you're second guessing what you think your boss wants. And what you should do is say, like, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And this could be on any level. What is my feeling and intuition toward it? And then how can I then provide that? And it's a little tricky with product design because you can't just go, I feel this is the right way. You have to do user research and testing. And a number of times I've been humbled by going, well, this is clearly the right design. And then we, did one-way mirror testing with people going through the prototype, and you're going, click the button, and they're not clicking the button. And you realize, well, my assumption is wrong. So the other thing that I learned from that is that it's not only good to have a diverse group of people working for you, and I don't mean from like, purely political correctness. It actually is important because they reflect the audience. If it's just me as a, cis male doing it, you're going to get one kind of perspective. But if I bring in different genders, LGBTQ, different, backgrounds, it suddenly opens up the aperture. And then you're able to see things from a perspective that you would never, because we're in these flesh sacks from our particular perspective, see. So it's not only like good ethically, it's good business.
Yeah. Kara Swisher, the journalist. Yeah.
Fantastic.
I love her so much. And she talks a lot about that the algorithms and tech companies are run by people who have never felt unsafe a day in their lives.
Exactly. I think that's incredibly important to realize. I learned that a long time ago because when I was a kid, being half Japanese in Texas was, challenging. And what was ironic, though, is when I went to Japan, being half white in Japan was challenging.
Outsider on both.
Yeah. So there was an equal kind of sense of like being othered. And I remember when my father, I had been telling him when I was in school, it's a Japanese school, like no one spoke English. And I didn't speak any Japanese when I first went there, so I had to learn very quickly. And my dad, gentle, nice man, white scientist, male, heterosexual, came to visit my school one day after I was there for like 9 months. And that evening he was just horrified. And I go, why? What happened? And he goes, they were yelling at me. These kids were screaming at me and throwing rocks and stuff at me. And I said, yeah, that's what I've been going through every day. But as a person who's never experienced anything, and it's not his fault, this is the circumstances of society, but he was born in a way that he didn't get exposed to that. And it's very easy for us to be in a privileged position, no matter what you are, and not have empathy for the other. And what probably made me a better artist and designer is I have radical empathy for things I don't understand firsthand. And I think to be a great designer, you have to have radical empathy. To be a great leader, you have to have radical empathy, especially for things that piss you off or you find bizarre in your own way. There's a reason. People do things not arbitrarily. They do things because they think it's the right choice for them to do. And you have to find out why that is. And I think right now, especially in our politically fraught time, it's better to go from like, oh, they're wrong and I'm right, to like, well, what is the core thing that they're reacting to? Why do they feel this way? Their solution may not be correct, but they're not doing it just out of like, no reason. They're doing it because there's an emotional and intellectual resonance that's affecting them on some level that they need to address. So as a great creative leader, I think you have to have that, and you have to have it not only for your own department, you have to have it for the other departments you're working with. Like, I don't understand like all the coding necessarily, but I have great empathy for what they're doing. And the commonality between a designer and a coder is that they're both working on making a thing, together.
Right.
So I think, bad analogy, but like, the designers making the shape of the car and the engines being designed by the the coder, so to speak. It's
Yeah.
not exactly
No,
accurate,
but
you
they
get the
don't
idea.
exist independent of each other.
Yes.
They do. I mean, there needs to be a harmony.
Yes, in the same way that in the car, the requirements of that car are made by a product manager. It needs to be an electric car, or it needs to be a hybrid car. It needs to have a certain kind of mileage. All that is requirements that a product manager would make. That then, taking this, analogy a little further, then the designer goes, well, we'll design this car this way, engineer it this way. And then the market department goes, well, we need to take it out. And then therefore it needs to be branded in this way. And the branding is basically storytelling around what you've done. So all those elements have to kind of come in harmony, and they're all equally important.
I'm always interested in people that are like outsiders or rebels, but within an environment where that's typically not allowed or frowned upon,
Yeah.
like, any sort of corporate environment. I mean, Hulu, tech company, these kinds of places where you're not out on your own
No.
doing this. You're existing within this framework, but you're still able to persist that way.
That's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
Like when I gave a speech at Princeton, I don't know, if it's a few years ago, and there's these really great, smart designers. I think I wrote about it in the book, and I said, "Look, you have all this ability, incredible amounts of, capability,
Right.
and you're going to probably go work for a Apple or a Google or a Microsoft, and they're going to hire you because you have all this ability, but they're going to immediately then constrain you to the job description of what you've got to do, which is not wrong. That's, and I said, you should probably do that for a while, figure out if that's what you want to keep doing, or if you want to go do a startup at that point, but you'll become really good at that one thing that you're doing. But don't forget you had all this other ability as well. So when I was hiring at Hulu, I was interested not only like, can you do the thing that you're being hired to do? Let's say designing for iOS on mobile, but what else are you interested in doing? Like, what else do you have an interest in? And if I do this correctly, I can unlock like 3 or 4 times the value of that person within the context of their work, because they're not only doing it to fulfill the requirements of that job, but they're doing it's like, oh, I'm interested in doing this other thing too. I want to learn about this other thing. And I think a lot of people get concerned about that, when they're leading a team, because they think, well, that'll be disruptive. And I'm saying, no, I'm not saying like, don't do the thing you're hired to do. I'm saying you can plus it on top of that. If you're interested in doing mobile design, maybe you're interested in doing TV design, or maybe you're interested in doing marketing, or maybe you're interested in doing writing. And these are things that will actually only help the company if you have engagement on that level, because you're getting one person who's doing more things, and they're benefiting because they're actually highly engaged in what they're doing. But this requires a certain kind of thinking, which is difficult because within the day-to-day tactical putting out fires of a business, it's difficult to kind of step back and go, okay, how should we do this? So I was trying to build in those moments within a company that you would allow people to take a breath and then really reassess strategically what they're doing. Because otherwise you can get very much into like the snowball effect. I've just got to, again, get these things off my desk and just keep going. But I think the rebellion, when I'm referring to creative rebellion, is the idea that things are done a certain way because traditionally they've been done a certain way. And they might work. Maybe there's a reason for that. But outside the law of physics, everything is made up, right? Even country borders are made up. Belief in government's made up. Belief in the value of money or Bitcoin is made up. It's a collective, like, consensus that we're going to believe in this. And I'm not saying go around like questioning, like, this shouldn't be happening. It's more like you shouldn't assume that this is always correct. Is there a better way? So going back to the interface question about Hulu. Typically, you would look at the competition and go, well, they're doing this. It's effective. Let's do the same thing.
Yeah.
But yes, take that in. That's research. And then give yourself a thought experiment. Like, what if I didn't know that? What would it look like? You know? So the UX of the future may actually just be a abstraction on your screen that you talk to and say, like, you know, I'm interested in like seeing an action film and dynamically comes up
Yeah.
on the screen, right?
Yeah.
Or not. I don't know. But that's the thing, you know, you have to think about. But if we keep thinking, no, it's got to be this blockbuster, you know, it's old, you know, store approach to like having just a bunch of things on a shelf.
Right.
I mean, I love Blockbuster because it's like going to a bookstore back in the day. For you young people who don't know what Blockbuster was, it was VHS tapes on shelves.
Yeah.
But yeah, you'll occasionally have things pop out to you. But generally speaking, curation is important.
Mm-hmm.
Go into a bookstore now, you usually have a table that says like, you know, our top picks.
Yeah. Staff picks, and maybe there's a
Exactly,
little
yeah.
index card with why they
Yeah.
like it. And that's meaningful.
Yeah.
Because there's a little bit of a human.
Yeah. You want, again, that's the human part.
Yeah.
You liked it, therefore I'd be interested. And this is where I think at times, you know, influencers and celebrities have a huge amount of influence because, you know, Oprah goes, I like this book.
Right.
You know, Reese Witherspoon goes, I like this book.
Yeah.
Huge.
If that authenticity is there, then you
Right.
want to connect with them by.
Because on some level, we think Oprah is authentic. We think Reese Witherspoon's authentic. We think whoever we were following as an influencer is authentic. And that's the human part, again, you know.
Yeah. I'm reminded, I mean, there's something very real. There's, you know, memes about how long it takes to decide to watch something on Netflix.
Yeah.
You know, it takes you 2 hours to decide something. I could have watched that movie I've been putting off.
Yes.
And so that speaks to some sort of the current state of UI. I mean, it's far from,
Right.
you know, they're still flawed, right?
Yeah, but it's also the reason why the best marketing is word of mouth. One human being that you trust goes, you should really check out, you know, fill in the blank show.
That's
right?
true. It can go right to the top of your list
Totally.
if someone goes, hey, you know, because choice paralysis, that's the term.
Yeah.
You have too many choices, so you end up not really making one at all.
Right. And then you just kind of go, ugh, no, I don't want to do this. But if you have somebody who goes, you really should watch, you know, this show, immediately goes to the top of your pick. You know, and then there's these movements that just happen. Like you have like a show that suddenly like Severance, it catches fire.
Yeah.
And that became a water cooler type of like, you should definitely check it out. But Severance worked too, because I think science fiction, if it's done correctly, and I consider Severance science fiction, is that it deals with current problems in a science fiction format. Everybody has felt the human, again, feeling of going into an office and having to cut off some part of yourself, shutting it down, and then having a very different experience with your colleagues at work. Then you go out the door, get in your car, and you're now someone else. You're, you know, boyfriend, girlfriend, dad, mom, you know, single. And that disconnect is what they clearly, you know, jumped on. And I think that things that take off in a zeitgeist are often that.
So going back to that time when you decided to write the book that you wanted to see out there, and what was your process like? How long did that take you from beginning to end?
I simply got up every morning at 5 o'clock and I did the classic, put a timer on, hit X number of words. And that especially worked with writing fiction as well, by the way. And for me, I have to get through a vomit draft, you know, very quickly.
I was wondering about that.
Yeah.
You just go be not precious about it. The
Yeah,
first
I'm not
draft.
fresh. I have a general outline of like, here's the themes I'm going to hit. And it helps, you know, just so you can kind of swing from branch to branch and kind of know where you are.
Right.
And then I had a really great editor and team at Page Two Books in Vancouver, the Canadians. So they were very nice because they're Canadian. But they were nice just in general. And they were really supportive of helping me get the book out and allow me to have influence on the design of the book as well. Like, you know, the paintings in there I did for that. And, but the amount of time is less important. It's like, what is it you're trying to get across? And what's the point of this book? And there was a point, you know, when I went into a bookstore and I got all these thousands of books. Who am I? Why am I writing a book? Why does it matter? And I realized, well, it's really important for me to do this, you know, and, you know, I wrote about this in the book. The chances of you even existing are almost exponentially, in taking, you know, any kind of belief system out of it, pretty low, you know, very, very low. So you've won the lottery. So if you're here, why not do something extraordinary? Like why not push for that and move out of passion, not fear? Because I find we're very much in a fear-based time. But if you can kind of switch that energy from being fear and anxiety into excitement, then there's possibility to do things that are engaging and interesting in that moment. So I wrote this book as a way as like the gift. It's a gift I wanted to give out so that people could feel better. And not to be all altruistic, but I do believe in the kind of Buddhistic idea that, the pain is going to be in the world, but suffering is optional. That you can help alleviate that suffering. And what that means, like simple ideas, like, if you get hurt, like you get in a car accident, that's pain, right? Physical pain. The suffering comes from like, why that happened? Why me? You get hit twice because now you're in a loop. Instead of like just dealing with the problem, you're now going through a story again, but like, why does this always happen to me? And which can be a problem. Or you can flip the story and go, I'm so fortunate that I didn't get killed. Like a thing happens, and how we do that changes the context, how we look at it. So I thought this book would be useful for people who may be feeling a bit of angst and existential suffering within a context of a job that they should be happy at, but they're not. It's not going to give you all the solutions, but what it does is ask you questions that allow you to come up with your own answers, because we're all having to make our own decisions for ourselves. But what's important, I think, is that since humanity and living can be a very isolating experience. We wake up with ourselves, we go to bed with ourselves, but I have found more and more that community is important. Friendship is important, family is important, because they work as a way to bounce back ideas for you. And if you can take your ego out of it, and they are doing their best to help you be your better self, that's important. And that feeling of like, let's help each other is what I try to bring into any environment that I'm working in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there's no competition. There's already been billions of people born before you and billions after you who are going to come.
Right.
Who are you competing with?
On that note, do you still deal with imposter syndrome?
Oh, yeah.
You do?
Everybody does.
Yeah. It doesn't go away?
I'm convinced. I think you can, I think it's different. Like, you can have high self-esteem, which is healthy, and you can have confidence in your abilities. But if you don't have a little bit of doubt, then you are probably delusional. I think imposter syndrome can be paralyzing. I think you should acknowledge that feeling, let it come up in your system and let it go. Because it can be a brain worm if you're not careful. And if you're not confident in being a leader in what you're doing, the company's not going to be confident in you either. And the people around you are not going to be confident. And once you lose that, you lose trust. So what I would do is I would, again, being vulnerable, acknowledge that I don't know something. What do you think? And then, but I think what people get imposter syndrome around is like, I have to have all the answers, or I'm going to be shut down or let go or what have you. But reality is, if you go like, I don't know, I've thought about it, I'm not entirely sure. What do you think? That becomes a conversation. And then your own sense of imposter syndrome just goes away.
Right.
Because again, going back to that sense of I'm not alone. Imposter syndrome often for me comes when I feel isolated. Like I'm on my own, I got to prove myself. Oh my God, I'm going to get judged. But if I can be in a group where I feel safe and I build a safe environment, then there's less of that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You talked about early on that you were very more closed off earlier in your career.
Yes.
And that was probably when, there's no, you're in your head a lot and there's no way for that imposter syndrome or whatever you're feeling to kind of dissipate because you're not communicating that. Right? You're not asking, hey, I don't know. Instead, you're the one that you think you have to have all the answers. And
yeah, there's an interesting thing about young people. Like a lot of great startups obviously are started by people in their early 20s. A lot of great art, a lot of great books are done. And those are the people who are just radically open. This is what I'm going to do. There's no second guessing. I'm going to be a rock star, right? Completely just locked into that. I remember seeing an interview where Liam Gallagher said, he goes, I didn't know how to sing, but I knew I was going to be a rock star. Like, or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but the point was he was locked in to that. Ozzy Osbourne, who recently passed, same
Yeah.
thing. He said, I just knew I had to get this out of me. And so you have young people who have that. And then you have a lot of people who are not quite sure. I have creativity in me. I'm not quite sure how to express it. I have a penchant to write, but I have nothing to say, as Samuel Beckett said. So those people are the ones I'm kind of writing the book for. Because if you already know, like I am going to be a jazz musician or what have you, and you knew that since you're 5 years old, you're on your way. You're fine. It's the other 90% of the people who are creative who are like not quite sure what the path is.
Yeah, that's a great point. You mentioned that most people's artistic tastes are kind of formed between 13 and 33,
Yeah,
roughly.
yeah.
And that's because just as you get older, you just have less time to take in new things.
Yeah.
But in your case, you've managed to stay very open
Yeah.
to that. Can you talk a little bit about why? Why do you feel that
Yeah,
you weren't stuck in that time capsule?
My argument is like I think it was a little more like 18 to 23 is really where you have
Right.
your most formative things because that's the first time you fall in love and music is playing and what music was playing. The first time you
Oh, yeah, milestones, right?
yeah
all those milestones.
those are tied into that. Like so the first time you discovered a writer that really moved you, it's your first time. By the time you've read 1,000 books, you don't have a first time with that. So that first time you read a book that like blew your mind or saw that movie that just, oh my gosh, like that is the reverberation that people still remember so that when they're older, they remember the music. They often default back to the music they were listening to when they were 18, or the books of the genre of writing they were interested in at that time. What I've tried to do is purposely break that down so that whatever my daughter's listening to, I listen to. I try to be open about it. Of course, I have my preferences, but I think it's very easy that we start to compartmentalize life because it can seem overwhelming, right? Like I don't have any, like Mark Maron said, I don't have time for any more music in my life. It's like, he doesn't want to bring any more.
Right. I love Mark Maron.
Me too. I think
Yeah.
he's brilliant. Rolling Stones is enough. I don't need to have any more on that. Whereas I'm thinking, you're kind of missing out on real opportunities. And then also by, let's say, using music as a vehicle, then you can connect to someone who's much younger than you. And that keeps you relevant so you don't age out. To me, ageism is less about how you look. It's more of your mental state. You can say, oh, I got aged out because they saw that I've been around for a long time. Or you can be just so vibrantly there that people are going to like want to engage with you. I don't think someone's like Richard Branson will never age out, because he's alive in the moment. He's here, and he's got these big goals.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting trick, right?
Yeah, I was talking to someone a couple weeks ago, and they're a studio head, and they had kind of a very entrepreneurial career. And I asked him about the constantly starting over at a higher level, but starting over, and how he felt about that, and if that was a fair assessment. And he said yes, but what he likes about that is that it keeps him feeling young.
Yeah. Because
Being at the beginning of something,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, which kind of goes with what you're saying a little bit.
Yeah, you're learning and it's exciting. Like the reality is that new technology and new things are scary initially. And like I worked for a blockchain company for a little bit because I didn't understand anything about crypto. So I thought, well, the best thing to do is jump into it. Then I consulted for an AI company because I didn't know what was going on with AI. And I'm not saying like I'm going in and coding, but I definitely learned how AI works. And I think right now with the incredible acceleration of everything changing, there's a lot of fear around like, how's AI going to affect me? Well, the reality is any new technology has always had that problem. When Photoshop came out, there was an immediate sense of like, oh, photography's over, everything's going to be a lie, we're in trouble. If you go far enough back, when photocopy machines came out, people thought, oh, well, that's the end of books. Everybody's just going to photocopy books and it'll be over. Now, given AI is a magnitude different in terms of like its scale and how it's affecting things, but essentially it's the shock of the new that we're dealing with. If you get so specialized at one thing, which by the way, I do think it's great. Like I've been in Japan and seen master craftspeople who are just brilliant in one thing. There's a huge upside of that too, becoming a master at something. But as the great samurai Miyamoto Musashi said, the path, of mastery in one thing leads to the path of mastery in all things. So if you get really good at something, It's like learning a language. You can learn the second one a little bit better,
Oh yeah.
faster,
He's
easier.
yeah. What is that? If you understand the way broadly, you can see it in all things.
Yes,
Or
exactly.
something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
along those lines. And so I think become really good at something, yes, and then have the ability to go, well, how can I apply my methodology to this new thing that I'm learning,
Yeah.
and be open to it, and avoid too much information coming into your head. I think a lot of the challenges we have too is I feel bad for young people. The reason why they're, vaping so much is like, can you imagine being 20 years old right now and the amount of bad news that's coming through your phone and the amount of like short-term content you're looking at and
Yeah.
your brain is not meant for that.
No.
You're not absorbing it. So if information is not absorbed, there's no way it can turn into any kind of knowledge. They can turn into wisdom. Those like different stages, right?
I always hate. I'm curious what you think about this. Is when people used to call Twitter, X, like the world's town square.
Yeah.
And it's like it's too much. The reason the town square was the town square is because there was a manageable number of voices. You could hear one another.
Yeah.
The world's town square. It's too much, and there's everybody shouting, and you can't make out a single voice. Right?
Well, there was decorum in town square.
That's very true.
There was like, you just have visual, like, if you had the
Yeah.
physical equivalent of X, it's just a bunch of people shouting
Right.
in a town square at each other and no one listening,
No
right?
listening.
Whereas you would have a decorum of someone who would be able to stand and speak their piece, and then step down. What we're losing is that, I think, is the social civility in discourse quite a bit. The one thing that was interesting is, because I go to Japan, and you see a lot of Americans, when they see Japanese, they think, wow, they're so ceremonial and so formal. And I would tell them, well, how do you think so many people can be together in an environment if they didn't have that? They would be at each other's necks the entire time. The bowing, the politeness is a social lubricant, which allows people to then slide by each other and actually connect. Whereas we're in a stage right now in the West where it's a severe form of individualism that might makes right and loud is better, which is so unfortunate. And I don't think it's the only thing that's happening. I think there's going to be a huge reaction against that, to where there's more kindness that's going to be valued. There's going to be more of a sense of moving away from the fear into optimism, because the things that got us into trouble with climate change and with, AI, machinery, whatever, can also be the solution. It's again, the story, right? It's a story we tell each other, ourselves. We can look at a thing and go, oh, doom and gloom, or we can look at it and go, no, opportunity. So how do we collectively switch into that? And that's where rebellion comes in. It's like the idea is like everybody thinks this way, doesn't mean it's the right way. This negative way is not the right way. The rebellion in this case would be thinking creatively in a positive way.
Right.
And people say, well, it's delusional. Being negative is delusional. Being pessimistic is as delusional as being optimistic, if you think about it. And I'd rather be on the optimistic side because there's more potential for things to happen and more solutions to happen. And it's easy because our amygdala, in our brain, is geared towards preserving us. And so fear is going to be the first thing that we hit. To switch that to a longer centeredness, it takes a moment.
Can you talk about why, in your pulling from the book, why you think it's important to give up hope?
Oh, that was a joke that I did, which one of my designers put on the wall, and because he was collecting quotes.
Yeah, I love that.
And I didn't mean it like give up hope in a sense that, you should despair.
Right.
It's more like you have an intention. And if you go, oh my gosh, it's got to be exactly this as a result, you're going to be in trouble because it's not going to probably turn out that way. And if it does turn out that way, you've kind of reduced possibility down to this one thing. It's kind of going back to that reason why I hired a lot of people from diverse backgrounds, is so I wouldn't be reduced down to like one thing. But if you give up hope, what I'm saying kind of snarkily, is that you do a thing, you put things into action, and you let the thing kind of give birth to itself in a good way. Because if I went in and said like, okay, obviously using Hulu as an example, because I wrote that there, it has to be this. It has to be 9 grids across this way. It has to be but if I am open and go like, well, let's find out. I have an assumption. I have a premise. I posit that this is a way to approach it. And if I'm wrong, I have to be okay with that. That's the giving up hope part. Like my hope is like, I really hope this works. In reality, something else may happen. And I think that's the interesting thing is you can have a goal that doesn't change, but the way you get there and then the thing that you end up getting as that goal might be very different than what you thought you're going to get.
Yeah.
I do believe it's important to have goals,
Yes.
but I think you have to be a little bit loose on holding on to what they're going to look like in the end.
Yeah. That reminds me, there's a quote that stuck with me from all people, Lloyd Blankfein, who's the former CEO of Goldman Sachs. This
Yeah.
was years ago. He was talking to
gosh.
interns,
Yeah.
and he said that he's not a sports person, and I'm not either. So I perked up, and I saw this on YouTube. I wasn't in the audience, but I saw it. And he said that in sports, rarely is a tight grip better.
Yeah.
So if you're in basketball, you don't want to just grip the ball so tight. You want a loose but flexible grip.
Yes.
He said you want to kind of live your life that way. Have a loose but flexible grip. And I think some of that is like what you're talking about, going back to when we're young, there's seeds of who we are,
Right.
but we don't always know until we're exposed to it, And so I think that just kind of echoes what you're saying.
Yeah. In going all the way over to Miyamoto Musashi again,
Yeah.
who wrote the Book of Five Rings. And in that, he talked about the grip on a sword, and everything is metaphor. And he says, hold on tight with your little fingers, but the top finger should be loose. So same kind of thing, like a golf swing, I would
Yeah.
imagine. So you're able, because if you're gripping it really hard the entire time, you have no flexibility, you have no way to move. But if you're gripping it on the bottom, your little fingers, and you're holding loosely on the top part, you have more opportunities
Yes.
to shift and change.
Yes. Every industry has rules. Some are there for a reason, and some are just begging to be broken. So what's a rule in your field that you don't follow or believe in?
Well, that's difficult because literally I write a book about pretty much
Like, this is right up your alley.
breaking all those rules.
Yeah.
It's interesting. One of the things that I wanted to do is increase productivity and mental health for my design team. So something that was at the time kind of unusual was in bringing in speakers who would either teach meditation, mindfulness meditations, like we would do an offsite. And I brought in a mindfulness meditation teacher named Lisa Kring to actually lead everybody through an internal meditation in the middle of like an offsite, which is very unusual. No one had done that at the time. Or I encouraged and helped to finance, through a budget for people to take ceramics classes. So instead of being on their computer, they're doing something different, that would actually allow them to be creative but in a different medium. So, a lot of my rule breaking is just natural for me.
Yeah.
Because I think it's just a way to help people realize their potential more.
Yeah. I'm reminded this was an interesting note from the book about I forget where you were at, but you were stocking the library at this company with design books. You wanted more design books, and you had a reading area set up either outside your office or near your desk.
Yes.
But you noticed that it actually didn't quite have the effect that you thought it would, right? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, because I don't do this anymore, but I tended to buy, creative art books, et cetera, and put them in a little sitting library area. And then I realized over time that people would not do that. They would not sit down and read because I think there's the societal pressure or the corporate pressure to feel like, look like you're busy all the time. And not productive, but busy.
Right.
And to be seen sitting there would be considered like an admission that you're not busy enough. At least that's a perception that people thought that they would have, that people are like, why is that? Why is John sitting over there reading, a design book when he should be on his computer or in a meeting? And I think that is an area that I tried to break, by doing that. And then I would encourage people to well, let's just have coffee or donuts, and have a conversation there. And so I did implement that. Every week I would have a meeting on Monday, I think it was Monday mornings, with different parts of my design team that I would have people who were senior designers and interns working in different departments come and just like an AMA, ask me anything in the sitting area at Hulu where I had all the books.
Right.
And then I would often say, well, here's a book you should read, and take it home with you. If you don't feel comfortable reading it here, totally fine. And so we had a library system, and my EA, my assistant, would then check people out with the book. And then there was no pressure. You don't have to write a book report, but just, flip through it and read it. And I'm a big believer in books. And I actually, not only for myself, but also I did design playbooks, which were physical. And the reason why is that most of the time when you do a design playbook, it's PDF or it's digital. And people kind of look at it and they don't really. But if you have a physical, beautifully designed object that's sitting on your desk, you'll probably pick it up and flip through it and maybe even go to the bathroom with it. And like,
Yeah.
there's a way to interact with it, which is still, one of the best ways to contain information going back thousands of years is the written word on paper. And I have found that so many things I've rediscovered in my computer, I'm like, if I had that printed out, I probably would have found it a lot sooner.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, I think there's a whole Seinfeld episode about how George Costanza keeps getting promoted. Every time his boss would walk by his office, he would look stressed out and busy.
Yes,
like
exactly.
not even doing actual work, just like and like
Yeah.
looking at nothing, but like just the appearance of
Yes.
quote unquote work. And that speaks to your point of somebody in the middle of an office reading a book.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, that's part of your job as a creative person, and it's fuel, but it's not seen that
No.
way generally.
But I don't remember exactly. But I remember like there was a Seinfeld episode, speaking of George Costanza, where
Yeah.
he decided to do the exact opposite of everything he would normally do. Right?
Yeah.
And it made him incredibly successful.
Right.
And I thought, that's a brilliant exercise in being authentic.
Yes.
Because again, going back to my younger problems, and occasionally even now problems, is like, am I playing me or I'm being me, or am I playing a role, that I think will please you? But the trick as I'm going through life and getting more experience is like, how can I just be radically, truthfully me? And that's what you're getting.
Yeah.
And that's the value though, versus like the kind of cleaned up,
Right.
polished, like, I know what you want, I'm going to give it to you kind of approach.
Yeah.
Because ultimately people want someone, whether it's, an executive or, like the greatest executives we have, whether we think they're, they're iconoclastic, whether it's Richard Branson or even Elon, with Elon being Elon, they are radically just being them to some extent.
Yes.
And that's what you buy into.
Yeah.
And then you have like levels of like, CEOs who are good, they're competent, they'll take care of the business. And then you have like the ones that you're like, I will go in the battle for this one.
Right.
And
Yes.
for me personally, I find those people to be the most interesting,
Mm-hmm.
because they're not surviving, they're thriving.
Before we go, I like to end with a rapid fire round
Oh, okay.
of just 5 questions, whatever
Yeah.
comes to mind. What was the last book you read?
Interesting, an older book called All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. Brilliant writer. One of my favorite writers. I tend to read I'm usually reading 2 or 3 books a week. Like just not finishing them, but like I'm in different
Yeah.
levels of completion, which I think are really interesting. So that book I think is a fantastic book. There's so many good, nonfiction books. Like I would say Mel Robbins' Let Them is a really good book. If you're into like improving yourself, I tend to like also read equal amounts of self-help books that can elevate me as a human being. But I also, tend to read books which are, older books too, just to make sure that I'm trying to get through Dostoevsky as well.
What's the movie you love rewatching?
Napoleon Dynamite. Yeah, I mean, Napoleon Dynamite, but also one of my favorite films is Blade Runner.
Oh, yeah.
The original.
Mm-hmm.
And I find something just incredibly beautiful about that. And I think it's actually really resonant for the times because we're not too far away from replicants. And, of course, the most amazing closing speech ever, by Rutger Hauer. And, I think that ties into the fact that humanity is special and that replicant was feeling humanity in that moment because humanity is from impermanence. The fact is that he's impermanent, and he was dying.
Right.
And I think there's something incredibly beautiful about that. And the idea of impermanence tends to run through all my work creatively as well. Not from a dire negative, but it's more like be here now.
Yes.
Appreciate it now because you may get tomorrow, but if you don't, you were present today.
Yeah. If it wasn't this, what's another career field you could see yourself in?
Well, that's difficult for me because I use the umbrella concept of art as an overarching thing in which I write, I direct, I make art, physical art, etc. So I kind of don't think of anything that can fall outside that umbrella too much. It's all pretty much in there.
Yeah.
So, the thing I loved about Laurie Anderson is that she was a multidisciplinary artist who could make film, could make music, could write books, could write poetry, and wasn't ever like classified down to like one thing. And I like that, the idea of being multidisciplinary
Yes.
and then integrating those things together into a life.
Worst piece of advice you've ever received?
The worst piece of advice I ever got was like, just be practical. Just be practical, John. Stop doing these big things. Stop trying to, and it's, I'm sure it was out of trying to help me, to protect me from failing. But what I've found is that I get energy from attempting big things. I get no energy from doing attainable things. And I think that's common for everybody, right? And I think it's important to be ostentatious in your goals and practical in your execution.
Yeah. I love that. You gain energy doing big things.
Yeah. Because
That's
that's the thing,
very
is like, it gets you excited. Like,
Yeah.
let's say, you're a writer, so someday you're going to make your own feature film. That's an exciting thing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm assuming I don't know if
Yeah.
you are,
Yeah.
but that would be a goal. And you're in the right path to do that. And you're tactically doing it because you write as well. So I think it's got to be an ostentatious goal that is still realizable, but you just haven't allowed yourself to, give a shot at it yet.
And finally, best piece of advice you've ever received?
Be kind, because we are all struggling. And no matter how well people look like they're put together, like they have money, beautiful family, there's something painful going on. It's just the human condition. They've lost someone, they've had heartache, there's a health issue that we don't know about, maybe some financial challenges. All those things are in there. And I think if we're here for any kind of purpose, ultimately it is kindness. And there's incredible power in kindness and helping each other.
Where can people find you or learn about your work?
Well, you can go to my website, which is literally john-couch.com.
I'll put that in the show notes too.
Yeah. And then I'm on Instagram at Shadow and Sun Art, which you can also see there. I took the name Shadow and Sun because I thought it's the dualities. You need one helps the other.
Yeah.
LinkedIn, of course.
Yep.
And I'm not really on X. I'm on it.
I lurk.
I lurk, but I don't really post on that.
Same.
So, but those are probably the main ones.
Yeah. John, this is fascinating, an absolute pleasure to meet you and to talk to you. I thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. It was amazing to meet you as well.
Hey, before you go, thank you for listening. If something in this episode moved you or even made you pause for a second, please consider following the show, leaving a review, and signing up for the weekly newsletter at storyseriespodcast.com. That's where I share my personal takeaways from each episode, what stuck with me and why, one story at a time. See you in the next one.